Hi, this is Parker, and in this video I'm going to show you how to run Python code that you write, both in the form of a script and as a module. I'm not going to teach you to actually write Python code or explain the Python language, because there are lots of sources online that will do that, but I'm going to show you how you can run the Python code that you learned to write from those other sources. I'm going to be doing this on the Mac OS because I'm making this video for some specific people who happen to be running Mac OS. The way that Python works will be the same on other systems, but the applications we use to prepare code for it and the way the command line works might be different, especially on Windows. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing to do is open up Terminal. I'm going to use Spotlight to do that, so I'm in my home directory, and the macOS has Python built in, so if I type Python and hit enter, it'll start the Python program, which brings us to the Python Interactive Interpreter, indicated by those three chevrons. So now I can use this for things like math, or I can print things, or assign things to variables, and then show the contents of those variables. And then to exit this, I can type quit. One thing that's useful to know is where the Python executable is that you're running. So there's a program called which if you give it the name of an executable, it can tell you the path to that. This is useful if you're trying to manage multiple versions of Python. The other thing that's good to know is what version of Python you're running. So this one was Python 2.7.6. You can also find that out by typing Python -- version, which gives you that information. There's also Python 3 at this point, but not everything supports it yet. A lot of code is still written for Python 2.7, so I think it's good to stick with 2.7 while you're learning. This isn't the latest version of 2.7 installed by default, but it should be good for most things. Don't worry about that until you run into something that actually requires a later version. And so this interactive session that we had with Python was using what's known as the read-eval print loop, or REPL, because Python will read something that you type, evaluate it, and then print the result, and then loop back and ask you to type something new in. And there are alternative REPLs for Python. This one is good for really basic use, but there's one that I like that I highly recommend called IPython that has a bunch of extra features, and as you get into developing more Python code and more complex Python code, I think you'll find those features really useful. So to install IPython, we're going to use something called easy install. So first type sudo, which means we're going to run this as the root user to give it permissions to install things. Then easy install pip. So we're going to install pip, which is a Python package manager, which will in turn let us install Python. So using sudo prompts you for your password. And pip is pretty small, so that installs easily. And then we can say sudo pip install IPython. And IPython is also a pretty small download, so that'll be quick to install. And now we can run this newly installed IPython and get an environment that behaves much the same way. It's still just running the Python interpreter, so I can type things and get output. I can make variables of things, and then, print x. But as I start showing you some of the workflow for creating scripts and importing modules, you'll see that this has some nice features like tab completion, and more advanced uses let you run underlying shell commands and a bunch of other stuff. And to get out of this, you can also quit. I've shown you some basic interaction in the Python shell, But before moving on to scripts and modules, I'm going to show you defining functions interactively in IPython. So I'm going to go ahead and start up IPython again. And to define a function, you type def and then the name of the function and any parameters you want it to take. And then I'm just going to print out the parameter was then %s to format a string and word, and then leave a blank line to indicate the end of the function. And now IPython has a myPrint function defined during this session. So if I type myPrint function, and then I can give it like some string as a parameter, and it will print that out as expected. But that's not a very useful function. A much more useful function would be computing the distance between 2 points. And the formula for computing the distance between 2 points involves a square root, which fortunately Python does give us access to, but it gives access in something called a module. So Python has, every install of Python ships with a math module, which we can access by typing import math. And now part of what's great about IPython is that it gives us tab completion, so I can type math dot and then press tab and see everything that's defined inside the math module. And sure enough, there's a math dot square root function. So just to see how that works, I'll just take the square root of a number, and in fact we get the square root. So now we have everything I need to write my Euclidean distance function. So I will define Euclidean distance 2D on 2 points, and I'll compute dx p2, 0th element of p2 minus the 0th element of p1, then dy similarly. And then I'm going to return math.square root of dx squared. Double star is exponentiation, and so dx squared plus dy squared. And now I have this defined. And again, using tab completion, to skip writing out that whole name, I can test this function with a simple 3, 4, 5 triangle. So I know that the hypotenuse is going to be 5 units long. So that's more of a sanity check than showing that this is right in all cases, but no major typos there. So this is great. I have a Euclidean distance function that I can run. I can compute the distance between other points, and that's nice and convenient. But that only exists inside this one session of IPython. And as soon as I exit IPython, I won't have that anymore. If I want to work on something tomorrow, I'd have to type it in again. And so that's why it's useful to store code in files, and in fact, I can create my own module. I can't add this to the math module, but I can create a Python file that I can import as a module into my own projects. Before we create the file for our Python module, I'm going to quickly go over text editors. So when you're writing Python code, you need to have a plain text file. So something like Microsoft Word or even WordPad on Windows isn't a good choice. On macOS, you have the built-in TextEdit, which is a nice plain text editor, but by default it's in rich text mode. So if you're going to use TextEdit, you should open up Preferences and select Plain Text, so that new documents open in plain text, or for an individual document, you can go to Format and make plain text, or use Command-Shift-T. So this way, when you save a file, it'll be just the characters that you type. There won't be any extra information about formatting like bold or italics or anything. So this is an okay solution on the Mac, but better options are Text Wrangler made by Barebones Software and Sublime Text 2. So Text Wrangler is available from the App Store, and I'll just show you what it looks like. So it gives you a plain text document. It has line numbers, and it'll do syntax highlighting for common languages. And it has a bunch of other features that are useful for writing code as well. The one that I'm going to use, though, is Sublime Text. So I guess I can go ahead and open that up, show you what that looks like. But before I actually show you how that works, I'm just going to say for other platforms, if you're on Windows, you can use the built-in Notepad, but that's a little bit tough to work with. There's a great program called Notepad++ that you can download, and on Linux, many distributions will have gedit built in, but actually Sublime Text is cross-platform. It'll run on Windows and Linux as well, so that's a pretty good one to use. Not going to bother saving this. I'm going to go ahead and create a file named demo.py with Sublime Text. So first I'm going to make a new directory named demo, and then in Sublime I'm going to save this file into demo, and I'm going to call it demo.py. That'll tell Sublime Text that this is a Python file, which is nice because as soon as I start typing things, it will give me syntax highlighting. So my goal here is to put that Euclidean distance function into a module. So I'm going to type import math because I'm going to need that for the square root. Notice that import is immediately colored to indicate that it's a keyword that Python recognizes. And then as I type my function, you see that I get nice coloration of different components of the function. Python doesn't do anything with the color. These are purely by Sublime Text for human readers. So now we'll type in the rest of this function as before. Whoops. Get dy here. And then my square root. Okay, so now I have my function in this demo.py file. I want to be sure to save it. And now if I run IPython, I can actually let me run that from the demo directory. So if I cd into demo, then I can run IPython. And now if I type import demo, it imports this file that I created. And using tab completion, I can see that demo contains the Euclidean distance function. I've also imported math, so that shows that math is used in the demo module. And then IPython is clever, and so it also shows things in the directory that I ran IPython from under tab completion. But those are not .py and .pyc are not available in the demo module. So anyway, I can use tab completion to call a function. So I'll just give it some random points here, and we'll see that that does in fact compute the distance as expected. So you might wonder what happens when you actually import a module, and it's pretty simple. Python just executes each statement in order, effectively as if you had typed them in to IPython yourself. And so the reason there's no output when we import demo is because this is just definitions. It doesn't actually do anything. If I add something like print hello world and then save this and load the module, you'll see that that gets executed as well. Since the module is already loaded, instead of doing an import to reload it, we type reload, and then you see that it prints out the output of this module, or of running the lines in the module, and then it says that the result was this module demo loaded from demo.py. And if I had changed the contents of the Euclidean distance function, and then I ran it again, ran demo.euclideandistance 2d, it would use the updated version. The other way you can use files in Python is as a standalone script. So I'm going to quit out of IPython, and I will clear the screen. You can run a Python script by typing Python and then the name of the script that you want to run. And if you hit enter, it runs the script. And what running a script means is similar to importing a module. It just executes every line in order. But definitions and things don't have much purpose in a script, or like we don't have access to them after running it because we're not in a Python interpreter. We did, however, get the hello world output. And you can stick everything in your script just directly in the file, but that makes it harder to reuse as a module because usually you don't want output when you're importing a module. So instead, we can write this if statement that checks if we're running as a script or as a module. So if I say if this magic variable underscore underscore name underscore underscore is equal to double underscore main double underscore, that will be true if and only if this file is being run as a script at the command line. So I can put whatever I want under here, maybe using the above functions. So like maybe I want to, in practice you might want to get user input or something, but for now I'm just going to print something out, like the distance between these 2 points is some floating point number that we're going to compute by using the Euclidean distance function that was defined above, 1, 3, and 4, 8. Let me make this a little bit wider so you can see everything. Okay, and then maybe I want to do some other stuff here, like count to 10, because why not? For I in range 1, 11, print I, and then we're going to say we're done, so print goodbye. And now if I save this and I run it, you see that it prints out the distance between those points and then prints the numbers 1 through 10 and goodbye. So I've run that as a script and used some things that I defined up here in the file. But if I go back into IPython and import demo, you'll notice that it doesn't do any of this stuff. It just prints hello world because that's at the top level of the script, not under this guard of name equals main. And so this is actually really useful because you can define a bunch of functions in a file and maybe have some code at the bottom that uses some or all of them to carry on a particular purpose so that you can run it as a script, but you can also import it as a module and use the functions that you've defined in other programs without worrying about what you're doing at the bottom of the script. So in general, it's good practice to not have any code that's going to execute while loading a file outside of the, or execute directly outside of this name equals main. You can obviously call functions from within this portion, but it's not good practice to print things out or to just write a function call up here, because then that will happen every time anyone imports one of your modules, and they don't want that extra computation. They don't want to see the output from that. This is generally a clean way to organize your code, and I think you'll find it useful as you start to write more code and manage code across multiple files. So hopefully that's enough to get you started writing Python scripts and writing your own modules. And even though I didn't go too in-depth, that should be enough to help you understand stuff that you read online when you look things up about how modules work, or when you read resources on Python and want to know how to actually run the code that they're showing you. And if you have any questions, let me know.